Welcome back to Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. This week, we're talking a few things. We're going to talk about a name change over in Cleveland for the baseball team. We're going to talk about pandemic basketball and the logistics and the lack of logic around starting basketball seasons in the middle of a pandemic. And we're also going to ask whether our all-star panel is in or out on a long list of hot button topics. But before all that, let's talk Alphonso Davies. Should be a wonderful week for him. This is a high point, right? Named the best athlete in his adopted country. And shortly afterward, his current girlfriend, Jordan Huitema, another national team player from Canada on the women's national team, plays for Paris Saint-Germain in France, post a picture of the two of them on vacation. They're a partnership, right? They're together. She posts a picture on Instagram of the two of them on vacation. Two really good-looking young people, successful young people, talented, driven, accomplished young people. What is there to hate about that? Well, obviously something, because he's Black and she's white. So predictably, this flood of negative commentary overwhelms the comments on her Instagram page, of course. Of course. And if you're Alphonso Davies, it is a timely reminder that it's 2020, but it's also 2020, right? And things like racism don't disappear with like the passive march of time. It's always an active campaign against these things. And a lot of times there are people who are just always going to hate on your success because you're Black. And that's what it is. And if you're Jordan Huitema, because you're his partner, she has to absorb a lot of the hatred. And so the comments like predictably run to racist stereotypes about about what's going to happen if the two of them have kids. Now, a couple of things. One, Alphonso Davies is 20 years old. Jordan Huitema is 19 years old. So they're a partnership. The two of them combined in age 39, which is 3 years younger than I was when my first daughter was born. So the point is, all these white racist fans are already thinking about what's going to happen when the two of these people have kids. First of all, it's not your business. It's Jordan Huitema's body. She decides when or if she wants to have kids, not anybody else. But two, you're missing the point. Anyone who is worried about what might happen to the gene pool of these two incredible athletes, stop worrying right now, because if kids come, they will be all right. Okay, I promised you guys the all-star panel would return, and they're back. And the thing is, some of us here on this panel we all love basketball, but some of us know it better than others of us do. So we understand the tension that's bubbling up right now between the press corps and Kyrie Irving, who says that reporters to whom he does not have time to speak are pawns. And so maybe we all are pawns, but I'm here with two of my favorite pawns, two of my favorite fellow pawns, to help make sense of all this stuff. Our first pawn is the biggest pawn on the chessboard by far. And I don't hold this against him. One of the first times I worked with this guy, it was during the interminable mating dance between Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. So this is probably 2011. And the last thing he said to me on this old podcast, on this discussion of this proposed fight, was that I think Manny's going to rip Floyd's face off. The thing is, listen, I'm not here to judge him by that take. Just to remind the audience that like all of us are, none of us is bulletproof. And I'm sure Dave, if he looked deep enough into my Twitter history, he'd find my bad takes, but I found his first. So Dave Zirin, how you feeling about that prediction?
I think if that fight had happened in 2011, I would have been absolutely correct. But when you have you have the genetic merging of Manny Pacquiao and the cast of the Golden Girls, and then they fight Floyd Mayweather, you're going to have a very different result. So please give me a break. Hey, that's a bad take.
And our other favorite pawn Listen, a lot of us covered the 2017 NBA playoffs. Oh, only one of us covered the 2017 NBA playoffs on one leg. Okay, on one leg. This guy's, if you guys have ever seen that clip of Byron Leftwich getting carried down the field by his offensive lineman back at Marshall, picture that, except without people helping carry her around. Megan, One Leg McPeak, how we doing?
I'm doing great. I think my intro was a little less on the chin than Dave's was, but hey, I rocked that scooter like a champion with one Jordan every single time.
So we record on Monday morning. So Sunday night, my Sunday night ritual is 90 Day Fiance. So I'm watching 90 Day Fiance and I'm tweeting, and I know Megan is deep into 90 Day Fiance. I don't know if Dave is, but in the midst of all these 90 Day Fiance tweets, a story comes across my timeline about the baseball team in Cleveland, who after more than 100 years, how many years, Dave? 105 years? Something like that.
I think it's 106.
106 years as the Cleveland Indians, they have finally decided, after slowly phasing out the imagery around this and retiring Chief Wahoo, the mascot, have decided that they are changing their name and that they will no longer be the Cleveland Indians. So my first question, Megan, tell me how excited you are to buy a Cleveland baseball team t-shirt.
Probably as excited as I was to buy a Washington football team t-shirt, which didn't happen. No, in all seriousness though, I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't say excited is the right word, because thank you for finally joining, 2020 Cleveland. And now, Kansas City, Chicago, we're looking at you. And countless NCAA teams, along with Atlanta. We're also looking at you. Like, if this is such an issue for the demographic of Native Indians, whether it is in Canada or America, their feelings, their thoughts, and their heritage needs to be taken into consideration when you think about what they have gone through in both countries. And I think this was the right move. Obviously, Morgan, as you mentioned, they started phasing out the imagery and taking as much of Chief Wahoo away as they could. And now this was the next step.
And Dave, what did you think of the timing?
Well, the timing is not surprising, and I don't think it's happening because team ownership cares a great deal about the thoughts and feelings of Native people. I think the reason why this is happening on the tail end of the Washington football team making the same change is because we're coming off a summer in the United States that had the widest spread protests for racial justice in the history of the United States. I mean, in terms of sheer numbers and sheer breadth, nothing historically is close to what happened over 2020. And these team owners, whether it's Dan Snyder in Washington or whether it's the family that owns the Cleveland team, they understand that this young generation of people that's coming up in North America, they are more diverse and they are less tolerant of intolerance. And there is a fight and an absolute financial war for the dollars of this young generation. I mean, unlike us who grew up with 3-4 channels, watching sports all the time, maybe it was a big deal when we got cable and got 30 channels. Like, young people are TikToking their way through life like it's nothing. And they have so many distractions for their dollar and for their time, and sports is fighting for their piece of the pie. And they know that if they roll with racism, they're going to be dismissed out of hand by this young generation. And so they understand that 2020, 2021, this is the time, as Megan put it so well, to join the 21st century, because they're not going to be, I mean, it's a question literally of their financial survival, I believe.
If you want to be at the forefront of this next generation and have them engage with you, guess what? You need to get with the times and adapt and change your business model, because they will pay the money if it is fun to go to.
So heading into this college basketball season, Keontae Johnson, a forward at the University of Florida, he was preseason all conference. But the thing about Keontae Johnson was he is also a COVID-19 survivor. He caught the virus in the summer, recovered to the point where he could play basketball again, returned to the team. This was supposed to be a big year for him, except in a recent game, midway through a recent game against Florida State, Keontae Johnson collapsed on the court in cardiac distress and had to be attended to on the court and rushed to hospital, where he wound up in intensive care in critical condition. As of this recording, he's still in critical condition, but whether or not he's out of critical condition by the time this broadcast hits the internet is secondary to the point that he wound up there in the first place. Again, sent there by a cardiac ailment, which by this point in the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that there is a relationship between COVID-19 and conditions like myocarditis. So my question to you, Dave, is after an NFL season where we've seen what happens when you just try to plow through a pandemic, and after an NBA postseason where we've seen the success, if we want to call it that, you can have when you make a commitment to putting players on a secure campus and just locking out the virus. After all of this, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah, what the hell are we
like
doing?
This?
Especially on the precipice of a vaccination, what the hell are we doing? Because I think that the NBA and the WNBA taught us a lesson, which is that if you want to have sports during a pandemic, then you need to have a hermetically sealed space. Otherwise, the pandemic will find its way inside your operation. That's just the way it is. We're dealing with a virus, and it is pitiless. And it's really something, because I think what you're seeing right now is a genuflection before the real boss of sports. The real boss of sports is not a commissioner. It's not a franchise owner. It's not even LeBron James. It's television money. And the sport is relentless and pitiless about putting product on the court or on the field. And the message to the players without shame is, if you don't like it, don't play. You don't like it, go leave, basically, because we are putting product on the television set, whether you like it or not, because that's really the lifeblood of sports. And so this is obviously something that I think for a lot of folks is kind of shocking, that the human consideration comes in second. But, honestly, it's the same thing that we're seeing like in the meatpacking industry in this country, and the same thing we're seeing in the supermarket industry in this country. Everywhere that's been deemed an essential workers, it's pitiless and relentless. The business will go on, and if you don't like it, you can quit and you could not work. The difference with sports that I think is so surprising to people is I think that for a lot of us, we view sports, to quote journalist Jane McManus, as the result of a functioning society, the reward of a functioning society.
Absolutely.
Our society is not functioning. And so when you see athletes, particularly you have to say NCAA athletes who don't have a union, who are not paid, to see them treated as if they are essential workers can be kind of shocking. But that is the relentless and pitiless business of sports.
And there's also this idea too, and you see it in college football, you see it in NCAA football, in the NFL, where these teams feel like they need to have spectators because they have to capture revenue. And you can split a hair by saying, well, the players are separated from the fans, and the fans come and they sit and the players play, and they're not going to infect each other, except if you bring 20,000 fans together. There's your super spreader event. And then it doesn't matter if the players get infected or not, because other people are getting infected in the community. And so from a basketball standpoint, like Megan and I talk about this offline, you kind of have in the college basketball space, you have these two camps of people. You have the Krzyzewskis and the Jay Billises that say it is lunacy to try to push through this pandemic. And then you have the other guys that say this is a great success because we've played 80% of our games. Megan, just as a basketball fan, before you're a journalist and a broadcaster, but like, is playing 80% of your schedule, is that a success?
It depends who you're asking. I think from a fan standpoint, fans were excited to have some sort of normalcy back, whether they were able to attend games or not. And when you look specifically at the NCAA, whether it's football or basketball, you mentioned Jay Billis, and you don't typically hear Jay Billis, who has the law background and is so insightful and so intelligent that whenever he speaks, typically we learn something. And when you have him on a game, calling a game, and he takes a moment to essentially, talk to us as a congregation and break it down that these amateur athletes who won't get paid and don't get paid have now been told you're an essential worker, and essentially they're treated like frontline workers trying to save people who are getting sick from this virus. So, and you don't typically hear him call us from the pulpit and speak so eloquently and so divisive while doing a game. He's typically very good at splitting, let me be on, Sports Center, whatever it may be, and have my opinion. But when I'm doing a game, I'm doing a game. But he took that moment to do something out of his norm. So that's my opinion from a fan standpoint. Obviously, we are fighting for something to come back to normal, because we can't do what we normally would be doing at this time, obviously with Thanksgiving recently in the US, and then obviously back in October in Canada, everybody was doing something different. And now we have, the holiday season coming up, and people are still trying to get some sort of normalcy. So having sports back as a fan from that standpoint, it gives you some sort of comfort that things are a little bit normal. Now, of course, from a standpoint, you look at, as you mentioned, the NBA and the WNBA with the bubble. The NBA was the first major league or league period to shut things down back in March. They made the decision, we're not going to mess around. We're going to shut things down. Commissioner Adam Silver and Commissioner Kathy Engelbert of the WNBA made it very clear, we're going to listen to the science. We're going to listen to the medical professionals and medical personnel, and then take that into consideration, work with both unions, and make the best decision possible. Lo and behold, that way we get the bubble. You now fast forward, they were also one of the first major four sports to return to play. Credit to the NWSL, who were the first of any sport to return to play with the tournament that they had. And it was successful, similar in a bubble situation. Now we fast forward to, right now, preseason has just started in the NBA. And I know countless teams, I know at least from a standpoint, here in DC, we're not having fans. They've made that decision for safety protocol as well, too. They're still listening to the science. They're still listening to the medical professionals. They're doing everything that they have in their power to keep the players and the coaches safe. They are testing as much as possible as well, too. So I think because they proved the bubble was a success and they have listened to the scientists and listened to the medical professionals consistently, they've made the decision, and they bargained with the players and made a decision together that they were going to safely return to play.
What do you think the chances are of the NBA getting through this season without either some type of stoppage or a bunch of outbreaks that they then have to try to spin as something positive?
I think that they have a better chance than the NFL does and the NCAA does, because they have from the beginning back in, March, which is crazy to think we're almost already back at March, almost a year later. They immediately shut things down, as I said. So I think I won't be surprised if there is a positive test, as we saw with, the return to markets, that first influx of grouping of positive tests. And then the second round that came out, it dropped down again. So you have players that realize that if they want to play, if they don't want a stoppage, they have to actually heed the recommendations that have been given to them from the medical personnel, not only of the team, but as well to the outside medical personnel that they could be consulting with, and actually follow the protocols that have been put in place. And, social distance, keep a very tight circle around them, try not to go out if they can, do everything possible so that you are not, patient zero. So I think the NBA has a better chance of not having a widespread outbreak or a pause, as you mentioned. It won't surprise me, though, if there is some positive tests here and there, because you don't know who's asymptomatic. But at the end of the day, the players are getting tested on a, almost daily basis. And I know Malika Andrews, ahead of the Wizards-Nets game, on her Instagram of ESPN, she kind of gave us a run through of what she had to do to even get in the building as a national reporter. You have to wear a mask at all times. You had to pass a rapid test before you got into the building, and and you have to socially distance. So they're even making sure that any media that is in the arenas as well too, covering these games, are also following protocol. So I think the NBA has put themselves in a position that should something negative happen, they are in a position that they can fight it and they can rectify it and not have a long pause in gameplay.
We bring up a rapid succession of hot topics. We ask our all-star panel if they are in or out. NHL Board of Governors is considering 4-division realignment, and that 4th division would include all the Canadian teams, I guess, to keep them from having to cross the border during the pandemic. Megan McPeak, are you in or out on an all-Canadian NHL division?
I'm in. Why not? Let's give a nod back to the original 6. Let's give the Canadian fans what they truly want, which is only caring about the Canadian teams anyways. Exactly. And of course, to your point of adding it into the question, it alleviates the cross-border, protocol and not being able to get American teams into the country and all that jazz, so that, all the Canadian teams don't have to all go to Tampa like the Raptors did. So I'm in on it. Why not?
Absolutely. Dave, you in or out?
I'm entirely all in because, Canada without hockey, that's New York without pizza.
Dave Zirin, you in or out on breakdancing in the Olympics?
I'll tell you, I'm out on breakdancing in the Olympics because as somebody, I can't believe I'm going to pull this card, but as somebody who grew up in New York in the 1980s, popping and locking, there's something about breakdancing that needs to stay on a true level. And once it goes to the Olympics, you know what you're going to see? You're going to see a bunch of Swedish and East European gymnasts with all the medals, and it's going to become gentrified. Breakdancing will become gentrified if it becomes an Olympic sport. So I'm for keeping it on the corner of 106th and Broadway and keeping it out of Helsinki.
Megan, you in or out?
I'm out on this one. Keep it in the streets, plain and simple, point blank, period. Keep it in the streets. It's for the people, by the people.
Megan, you in or out on James Harden's pre-training camp victory lap?
I'm out. I'm out on it. Just bro, suit up. Let's play. Let's come on. At a certain point, once the other trade went down, then his trade stock kind of went down with it. At the end of the day, they're not going to get what they want right now. They're thinking they're going to get KD or Kyrie. You're not going to get that from Brooklyn if you want to make that trade. I'm out on it. Get in uniform. And let's toss the ball up and let's play.
Dave, you in or out?
I'm so out. James Harden is as tired as that beard.
COVID-19, vaccines. I understand the NBA and the Players Association and the owners are trying to figure out the best way to create and engender widespread uptake of one of these new vaccines. Dave, you in or out on mandatory vaccines for pro athletes?
Well, I want to just first be very clear that I think everyone should be vaccinated. As far as I'm concerned, harpoon that syringe into my arm at the first possible moment. I'll do it from across a room. But I feel like this is a decision that a player has to make between themselves and their doctor. I'm very nervous about a precedent where an organization is telling people what their medical decision should be. So as pro-vaccine as I am, the idea of mandatory vaccines, if you want to play in the NBA, it makes me concerned and nervous about the Rubicon that crosses.
Mm-hmm. Megan.
I think as well too, you also have to take into consideration if it was part of the collective bargaining agreement as part of the return to play, if it was collectively bargained that if a vaccine became available, that it would be expected for players to take, then, you sign the paper, you kind of got to follow it. But I think at the same time, when it comes to vaccines, if it is left up to the players and their medical professionals, I think it's a decision they have to make. So I'm in on the fact that it could be readily available to the players to add into the safety of this season. But I'm out on the fact that forcing them to do something, but again, comes down to collectively bargaining.
Yeah, I'm out on mandatory, but I'm in on vaccines becoming the norm. And it's sort of a hair to split, but it's an important distinction. And some people medically cannot take a vaccine if you're allergic or something like that. But if certain people are allergic, that makes it that much more important for everyone else who can take the vaccine to do it, because that person who's allergic loses a layer of defense against the virus. So I am all in. And let's not forget, there was a few years ago, remember the NHL had that mumps outbreak, and all these guys were skating around with big lumpy faces because these diseases can get around so quickly within locker rooms and across teams. So I am all in on vaccines becoming the norm, so we don't have to or becoming the norm. They were the norm. They are the norm for most people, but there's a growing subsection of us who think it's okay to question this stuff. But I'm all in on vaccines becoming the norm, to the point that these NBA players or whatever pro athletes are taking them can also set an example for the rest of folks who might be skittish about taking them, because the sooner that happens, the sooner we can get back to whatever normal is going to be. Last one, we're going to start with Megan, because like Megan, this person is an all-star Canadian student athlete, Chuba Hubbard at Oklahoma State. All-conference running back, has decided to opt out of the rest of Oklahoma State season to prepare for the NFL draft, which in a normal year would be an even bigger decision, because in a normal year you'd have a much bigger bowl season. So you'd have the best player on a top 25 team saying, I'm not going to go to this postseason game because I'm going to prepare for the NFL draft. And so that's good for him, bad for the team, but this is what you do when amateur and pro sport come into conflict with each other. So Megan, are you in or out on teams being able to pay their star players to at least stick around for the bowl game?
I'm in, but it doesn't mean they're going to still stick around and play. And I'm in on it being up to the player. At the end of the day, if you want to call me an amateur athlete and you don't want to pay me for my services, but you want to make money and you're going to make billions of dollars off of me, sure, yeah, I'm in on paying them to play and stay back and play. But at the end of the day, that player is still going to make the best decision for them. And a one-time paycheck over a potential 10-year career in the NFL, they're probably not going to play anyways.
Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I'm out because I think it gives a veneer of legitimacy to the bowl project that is NCAA. And I'm for anything that vivisects the idea that this is somehow a legitimate operation. It is not a legitimate operation. My goodness, it is organized theft of wealth of these young folks. And so anything that just says, no, here, kid, here's a little something off the top. Come play in the, Doritos Tostitos Bowl. I mean, I'm for whatever it takes to say, nah, this entire operation is shambolic.
Yeah, so that ends episode 1. The first one was the pilot. This is official episode 1 of Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. Big thanks to, again, my 2 favorite pawns in the sports industry. Kyrie Irving might not think much of us, but I think the world of these 2. Dave Zirin, Megan McPeak, both in Washington, D.C., but Megan's a dual citizen. No, you're not a dual citizen, Megan. Megan's a Canadian in DC. I'm the dual citizen. Dave is the American who's the honorary Canadian. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming out again, guys, and making some time on a Monday morning to do this. If you like what we're doing, guys, don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to comment below. If you hate what we're doing, comment below too. It's all love. I don't read the comments anyway, but comment if you can, because all engagement matters. We'll be back in the not too distant future, probably with a guest, definitely with the all-star panel. If you spent this much time with us, we thank you. And we'll be back on Bring It In with Morgan Campbell.